What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a bit of a discussion video around talking about price points in video game reviews. Very recently, I was reviewing Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song specifically, and in that review, I talked a decent bit about the price of that game and how I thought, compared to other games in the same genre, the asking price was pretty high, which pretty much every other review of the title actually didn't really mention much of. So naturally, I was thinking about that in the context of a review, and I decided to make this discussion video on the topic. Now, in general, my approach to the discussion of how much a video game costs when it comes to a review is to explain how I feel about the price point, and then give a recommendation on buying the game, waiting for a sale, based on how I personally feel about it. Now, that said, I do think there is some merit to not necessarily including a recommendation based around the price when it comes to reviewing a game, for a variety of reasons actually. But it is my personal opinion that the price of a game should be a factor in the recommendation of buying a game or not. However, I don't think it should be a factor in talking about the quality of a title, because price is one of those things that just varies drastically, which is really my first point in considering when not talking about it, because the launch day price of a game isn't going to last, quite frankly. Games tend to drop in price drastically from the time of their release. That's pretty common. Meaning that if you mention specifically what the price of a game is as a factor in a review, that's information that's going to outdate itself pretty quickly. Now that, as a point, I think is pretty self-evident. Obviously, if you can buy something for cheaper, buy it for cheaper. However, at that same time, what $60 means to one person does not mean the same thing to another person. And then in that same vein, depending on where you live, video games are not priced the same. You actually do get a decent amount of regional variance in terms of the pricing around video games, like most other things, honestly. So just right there is enough reason to not necessarily go in and talk about all of the specifics around the price point of a game. But nonetheless, I do think that it is important to mention the pricing. However, I do think the context and how you are mentioning it in terms of the review is important, because as I already said, the actual price of a game is something that will change, but the quality of a game, for the most part, stays pretty consistent. These days, obviously, we have things like patches, etc., that can change a game post-launch, but broadly speaking, that's something that remains relatively consistent. And as such, the points about gameplay, etc., or the overall assessment of that game in particular really shouldn't take the price into consideration too much. However, I do think whether or not to recommend a game really does boil down to the price itself, actually. Because a game can be amazing, but if it's $200, I'm not paying for it. At the same time, a game can be very mediocre, and that doesn't necessarily mean I wouldn't throw $20 at it. So overall, more than anything, I guess my point for this discussion video is that the conversation around pricing, especially in the context of a game review, is something I find very interesting, and again, personally, I talk about it in every review, but largely in regards to what I think is a fair price, especially in its relation to what would be considered normal for that genre, etc., because ultimately, this isn't a decision I can make for anyone, and at best, I can really only convey how I feel about the pricing around a video game, which just fundamentally is never going to be something everyone agrees upon, because the inherent value of entertainment is something hard to quantify. Whereas with a lot of other physical goods, it's very easy to be like, this is the intrinsic value of that thing. Whereas the value of entertainment largely comes down to the person consuming that entertainment, and thus the monetary value applicable to the said thing is going to vary wildly person to person. And more than anything, that's just a conversation I find very interesting, so I decided to mention it and talk about it with this video. So naturally, I'm very curious to hear about what you, the audience, thinks about it. So by all means, let me know how you feel about this subject down below. Looking forward to reading all the comments. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.